Ø.H.M. It's the weakest possible species. I don't know where that name comes from, but yeah, Ø.H.M. Pitiful worm.
Recently, Ambiguous Amphibian, the grandfather of paraplegia and producer of Sneck the Musical, took on my Rimworld Tileman challenge and publicly humiliated me. And here's how I got payback. But first, what is a Tileman? Rimworld Tileman is a game mode that I adapted a year ago from the OSRS community. See, you essentially start with a single pawn on a single tile with 0 experience points in all skill sets. You unlock tiles by acquiring buckets of 100 experience at a time. This challenge is inherently difficult and interesting as you have to make most of every single tile at your fingertips. My past attempts had all failed in under 15 days due to starvation, mental anguish, and knife wounds, but I always knew that I had more gas in the tank, and this humiliation was the petroleum to my jelly, the adenosine to my triphosphate. I got to work redoing the Tileman challenge. I was going to outshine this enigmatic lizard. I had to make it harder, better, faster, and stronger. And so meet AA the Sea Man, my tile-locked hardcore Iron Man. Before we get into this scenario, let's examine what AA did during his challenge so that we can set out some acceptable victory conditions. AA survived 69 days, landed on a habitable piece of soil, started with inspirations and the traits iron-willed and industrious. But unlike this false screen prophet, my specialty was swimming in the swamp. Rather than look on at the dung with disgust, I consume it, nourish it, and incorporate it into my very being. So this run is going to be very simple. I will start with 0 inspirations, 0 traits, and we need to survive 70 days crash landed in the middle of an ocean butt naked. Day 1, we quickly took stock of our surroundings. For now, our goal would be to fish, gain experience, and unlock tiles. With 0 passion in my skills, I would only get a tiny trickle of animal handling experience throughout the whole day, so I had to choose my tiles very carefully. The amount of fish we catch is also dependent on our animal skills, so I would be catching barely enough to fill my stomach for now. Even a single missed catch, a slippery trout, could snowball into disaster. After spending 6 hours up to my waist in water, we got the first catch of 10 beautiful trout. This netted me about 160 experience and would unlock 1.6 tiles and keep my growling stomach at bay for a few extra hours. Another 6 hours passed in a haul of 10 bass. I finished the first day feasting on raw trout and spent the fruits of my labor, 3 of my tiles marching towards my salvation. After this, I laid down in the shallow water and shut my eyes. But this posed an interesting question as how do you sleep in water? Is it up to my knees or up to my head? Rimworld only describes it as shallow water, and shallow water lacks a description of depth, so I got to investigating. It turns out that shallow water is defined as the depth where surface waves are noticeably affected by the bottom topography. This implies that depth is equivalent to less than half the wavelength. For you Americans, swimming pools classify an area as shallow water when they are less than 5 feet in water depth. Using this knowledge, I like to imagine AA slept by floating on his back like a sea otter, cradling his remaining trout. I woke up at the crack of dawn on day 2, ready to cast my line. We had amassed 330 experience throughout the first day, and we were ready to make more progress towards the solid land. First catch of the day, 10 bass, and after that we caught 2 koi fish, which was incredibly disappointing. Compared to the trout, this would give me half the nutritional payload. Becoming desperate, I decided to forego sleep as long as possible and continue fishing throughout the night. The last catch? Another 2 koi. And so I once again laid flat on my back, this time depressed thoughts in mind, and floated off into the shallow blue abyss. The clock turned and day 3 was upon me. I had 700 experience and was feeling optimistic about finally hitting the sandy shore. After spending all my tiles, we were about 7 squares away from leaving our amphibian lifestyle. Another day of fishing produced a bounty of trout and freshwater eel. As the day was winding down and I was on my last catch, I heard a chittering in the distance. A squirrel, driven mad by syphilis, bore down on our beloved sea man, violence intent in its eyes. As it was swimming towards us, I dispatched it with a quick kick and a punch to the head. AA only suffered a minor scratch to his torso and shoulder in this process. This was absolutely massive for us because it gave me melee and tending experience. With an extra 3 tiles from fishing and 4 tiles from our battle, we finally had enough to get our feet on sandy shore. Like the Tikalik Rosia did 300 million years ago, our seaman had evolved into the age of land. The next day, we did a little more fishing and butchered the squirrel for a meat and cooking experience. Its small body only gave us a morsel of food, but we were still on the edge of starvation, and beggars can't be choosers. Day 5 opened up with a torrential downpour. There would be no escaping the rainy weather, and I continued spending my days fishing, eating, and praying to avoid food poisoning or a mental break. In the early hours of Day 7, a mysterious woman came charging at us, knife in hand. Normally, this would have been my doom, but the game chooses your raid danger level based on the value of your pawn and colony. To no one's surprise, the game decided that since I was so obscenely poor and weak, the threat would be low. How low, you ask? Well, Rimworld determined that I would be a fair match for an elderly fentanyl addict with multiple scars and a bad back, plus a wooden foot. A bloodied victor had emerged, covered in stab wounds and likely infected with all manner of sexual diseases. But we had acquired a knife and, most importantly, a smoke leaf joint. This joint could be critical in preventing mental breaks and keeping this story afloat. After patching ourselves up, we took stock of our banked experience. We had almost 20 tiles collected and could finally reach the fertile ground. This unlocked wood, buildings, food, stability, all things that we desperately needed. And so, we celebrated the first week being done with the smoke leaf joint. 3,600 experience gained, 36 tiles unlocked, and positivity was blooming. On the 9th day, we experienced our first mental break, a corpse obsession. 3 days of fishing later, and we had leveled up our animal skill and stabilized our hunger. We were also assaulted by a mad alpaca, but it proved no match for AA's new knife. Now, with a total of 54 tiles unlocked, we increased the allowed zone to encompass more soil to allow for more future growing endeavors. A thunderstorm poured down on AA during the 15th day, and we had had enough of sleeping in the rain. I utilized the newly chopped wood to erect a basic roof over our head and stockpile. With more tiles unlocked, we could look towards the horizon for stability in the form of planted crops and basic entertainment. But life would not be so easy as we experienced more mental breaks. A daze took up the rest of Day 15 and the majority of Day 16. This paired with food poisoning on Day 18 had significantly slowed down our earlier progress. The immediate task at hand was simple yet game-changing. We were going to make our first fully enclosed shelter. This would prove vital in our survival as it would allow us to hide from increasingly dangerous animal threats, while also giving us an area to shelter from the sweltering heat. See, it was currently 40 Celsius during the day, and if it got any hotter, I would start to suffer from hemoconcentration and cerebral thrombosis. What does this mean? I don't know. After a full day of construction, we successfully built a tiny shelter and spent the night. We suffered another days following this and spent a few days fishing to recoup from our downtime. On Day 24, a raider attacked us with malice in mind and club in hand. We took him down and enjoyed the victorious spoils. We carried on and planted more rice and continued our cycle. Fish, eat, sleep. By Day 30, we decided to make some major improvements by planting more crops, clearing more trees, and improving our living quarters. The season was also starting to change and the leaves starting to yellow. Fall was upon us, but September was a month of aggressive growth. With a stable food source available, we could spend time focusing on want, not only need. We made a table, planted a garden, made some defenses, had a few tantrums, and tended to our growing crop. While the uncertainty of the world had yet to fail, I started to realize something. I set out to beat Ambiguous Amphibian, but what I really did was set out to beat myself. I had never gotten a hardcore Tileman stabilized, but here we were. Enough food on the horizon to not worry about starvation, defenses against raids, and enough comforts of the world to fend off mental anguish. And with that thought in mind, I decided to end his journey. We started this saga floating in the ocean 40 days ago, hopeless, soggy, useless, and we end our journey entering the coveted ranks of the finest seamen to ever grace this world.